16 of the strangest unsolved mysteries of all time. Get ready to have the hair on the back of your neck stand on end, because these unsolved mysteries are among the most chilling we've ever heard. 1. The incident at Dyatlov Pass. The Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959 remains one of the most unsettling mysteries of the last century. The story is well known, involving a group of hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. The group planned to make their way across a 7-mile trek through snowy terrain toward Gora Taurdan, a mountain whose name in the native Mansi, Wutayrotansachel, means windy mountain. The steep terrain and forbidding conditions were plenty enough to ward off most travelers, though the Dyatlov party was an exceptional group. Each of the team members already possessed Grade 2 certification as hikers. Upon completion of their trek to Gora Taurdan they would receive Grade 3, and many were also experienced skiers. Having already spent years on the slopes of the Urals. Nature can be unpredictable though, and whatever happened on the night of February 2nd completely took the group by surprise, leaving them disoriented, and exposed to the worsening weather along the eastern slope of Polotsk, where several of their lifeless bodies remained until searchers arrived more than 3 weeks later. The search party eventually found the disheveled campsite, where the group's tent lay cut open, and partially covered in snow. Evidence nearby showed that someone attempted to build a fire, which was discovered near the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonisenko. The first 2 bodies the searchers managed to find each of the men still in his underwear. The remains of Dyatlov and 2 other hikers were found afterward, within a few hundred meters of their campsite. The remaining bodies were discovered in a ravine 75 meters away the following month, wearing clothing which appeared to have belonged to some of the other hikers. Over the years, a wide variety of theories have been proposed as to what might have led to the hikers' deaths. Ranging from the absurd to the seemingly plausible, investigators and internet sleuths alike have proposed everything from secret Russian weapons tests, and mysterious fireballs seen in the skies over the Urals, to infrasound phenomena, and even an alleged attack by an abominable snowman as the cause of the mysterious deaths. As far as the latter of these goes, the evidence for the Yeti theory is flimsy. At best, the idea was presented as the premise of a Discovery program a number of years ago called Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives. This documentary, as it was billed, featured photographs and other material from the expedition members, including images recovered from the camera of Nikolai Thibault. Interestingly, the final photograph on the film in Thibault's camera does appear to show a humanoid figure, which appears to be slightly hunched over and standing some distance away in the forest, as featured below. However, this cryptic image may not be as interesting as it would seem at first glance. The image, when appearing on various sites and blogs, is often featured by itself, and/or with emphasis on the fact that it was the last photograph Thibault had taken. This, of course, caters to the photo's mysterious appearance, although with the help of a little context, the photo really doesn't seem all that unusual. This is because in the photos preceding our alleged Yeti image on the same roll of film, one can clearly see that the sequence depicts Thibault himself taking a series of pictures of himself, perhaps using a timer, as seen below. When observed in context with the other photos, that final, cryptic-looking image is revealed to have probably been Nikolai Thibault himself, not an abominable snowman. The only other information pertaining to the Dyatlov case that is remotely suggestive of a connection to the Russian Yeti involves an anecdotal reference to the creatures residing near Gora Taurdan, which the group included on a satirical newspaper they kept and updated throughout their travels. Under a section labeled Science was the following passage: "In recent years there has been a heated debate about the existence of Yeti. According to recent reports, Yeti lives in the northern Urals, near Taurdan Mountains." This passage is often misquoted, however, featuring variations such as, "From now on we know the snowmen exist. They can be found in the northern Urals, next to Mount Taurdan." As with the alleged Yeti photo, removing the passage from its proper context once again allows the insinuation of snowmen to appear far more ominous than the hikers themselves probably intended. As with many similar unsolved mysteries, the fact that there are so many loose ends that remain has fed into speculation over the years. Plenty more could be said about the case, and the numerous inquiries and investigations the incident has inspired over the years. And of course, the numerous theories that abound, many of them sensational. though none quite so strange as the entire Russian Yeti affair. In truth, while unable to account for all of the unusual aspects of the incident, the most likely cause probably does have something to do with an avalanche. But if any of the more fringe ideas are really worth a second look, the reports of fireballs over the region are perhaps the most interesting, and might even imply the presence of natural phenomena like ball lightning that some were seen around that time. Not only is this a far less sensational explanation for unusual lights that were being reported, especially when compared with ideas of missiles, UFOs, and secret Russian weapons tests, but it might even explain some of the strange behavior of the hikers on the night they met their fate on the slopes of Kolatsikal. For more on this, including an unusual ball lightning-related incident that bears a number of noteworthy similarities to the Dyatlov Pass incident, see my recent article here. Also worth noting, a similar ball lightning theory pertaining to the Dyatlov Pass incident has been proposed by researcher Nigel Evans, which can be read about here. Granted, like every other idea that has been offered as a solution to the Dyatlov Pass incident, the ball lightning theory should be taken with a grain of salt. After all, these are all just theories, and none that have been offered can really account for all the circumstances present. When searchers finally discovered the remains of Dyatlov and his companions, we will probably never really know the full story of what happened, let alone why some of the results of the original investigation on site were withheld by the Russian government when the files were released in the 1990s. As with many unsolved mysteries, the Dyatlov Pass incident provides enough data to be enticing, but hardly enough to draw solid conclusions. 2. Ghost Ship, the Mary Celeste. The story's been told so many times that some don't even believe it's real anymore. Believe it or not, it actually happened. Found adrift on December 5, 1872, without a soul on board, the Mary Celeste became the defining example of a ghost ship. After she was adrift and abandoned, speculation about what happened to her crew has lingered for over a century. Theories range from mutiny to alien abduction. Folks have invented or exaggerated many details. As early as 1883, newspapers took creative license to make the story more interesting, inventing people and events that simply didn't exist. Okay, so what exactly happened? On December 5, 1872, the British vessel De Gracia spotted a vessel drifting. Moving close, they identified it as the Mary Celeste, a missing vessel that did not arrive at its destination, Genoa, Italy. A boarding party was sent over and they discovered that the crew was missing. Navigational charts were tossed about, belongings were still in crew quarters, one of the ship's pumps was disassembled, and nearly 3 feet of water sloshed about at the keel. Plenty of supplies and cargo on board, food, water, alcohol, etc., yet the crew was gone and so was the ship's only lifeboat. The ship's final log entry, November 25, 1872, stated that 9 days before the ship was found adrift, it was over 400 nautical miles away. The evidence on board suggested an orderly abandonment, no violence or fire. Its crew of 7, captain, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter were all missing, but their personal items were still on board. The De Gracia crew sailed the Mary Celeste some 800 miles, to the British port of Gibraltar where a salvage hearing commenced. 3 months later, the De Gracia crew was awarded payment for bringing the Mary Celeste in. It was small, barely 1/6th the total insured value of the ship and its cargo. There the Mary Celeste may have slipped into the cracks of history. Enter Sir Conan Doyle. In 1884, the young author anonymously published a short story called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. Written as a first-hand account of a survivor of the Mary Celeste, highly sensationalized, this work of fiction took creative liberties in the telling of the fate of the ship. It even went so far as renaming its captain, several crewmen, and the Mary Celeste herself. It describes a ship found in pristine condition, lifeboats still aboard in heavy weather. The story became a hit and quickly outcirculated the real account, thus dropping the first triples of fable into the story. Subsequent theories and accounts of the mystery continued to pull the story further and further away from the truth. Piracy, mutiny, and aliens have been blamed for the Mary Celeste's abandonment. The ship itself would endure for another 12 years. The succession of stories ultimately made her very unpopular to own and operate. Salvagers sailed the ship to New York, where she spent the rest of 1873, tied to the dock. In 1874, She was sold at a loss to a partnership. The new owners operated the ship on the Indian Ocean, yet the ship's infamous reputation prevented her from ever making a profit. She lost money on nearly every voyage. In 1879, her captain fell ill and died, further fueling the myth that the ship was cursed. Her owners sold her a year later to a firm in Boston. The next 4 years would see her port of registry changed multiple times and her commanding officer changed twice. Records indicate that she made no major voyages during this time, despite efforts to turn the ship's luck around. In November 1884, her commanding officer, Gilman C. Parker, along with several crooked shippers, tried to scam the insurance company that insured the Mary Celeste, filling the ship with worthless cargo. They forged a manifest, claiming a value of $30,000, $800,000 and $2,017. A month later, Parker set sail for Haiti. As the Mary Celeste approached the port, Parker deliberately steered the ship into a well-known reef. The collision ripped the keel apart, wrecking the ship. The crew abandoned ship and Parker proceeded to file a claim for the doctored value of the cargo. In 1885, the insurance company investigated and discovered the overinsured cargo. Later that year, Parker and his co-conspirators were charged with fraud and Parker faced an additional charge of barratry, fraud by a ship's captain, a capital offense at the time. Parker's trial ended in a mistrial, but the damage to his reputation was total. He died a broken man 3 months later. As for the Mary Celeste herself, her wreck was never recovered. Over the next century, the wood timbers were overgrown by the very reef where she ran aground. In 2001, an expedition claimed to have discovered partial remains, but that has never been definitive. 3. Who, and where, is D.B. Cooper? Journalist and documentary filmmaker Thomas J. Colbert has spent years chasing leads in an attempt to figure out the identity of the famed skyjacker known as D.B. Cooper. Today, the chase will end outside the entrance to the FBI's Washington, D.C. headquarters. There, Colbert plans to level serious charges against the federal law enforcement agency. As we suspected, records show the Bureau has been stonewalling, covering up evidence and flat-out lying for decades, he told the Oregonian this week via email. Colbert believes he finally has all the proof he needs to make such a brazen statement about the FBI's handling of the Cooper case. So he says that, at about 11 a.m. Eastern Time today, he will stand outside the J. Edgar Hoover building and publicly lay out his evidence, point by point. For the uninitiated, on November 24, 1971, a man using the name Dan Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Flight 305 out of Portland. After taking on parachutes and $200,000 in ransom at Seattle's airport, Cooper jumped out of the Boeing 727 somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, and disappeared. The FBI determined that in all likelihood the skyjacker died from the dangerous nighttime leap, but no one outside the Bureau wanted to believe that. The mystery man became an outlaw legend, the subject of folk songs, books and a hit Hollywood movie. Colbert, who put together a large team of retired law enforcement officials to pursue the cold case, is convinced he had identified the man who took over Flight 305 that long ago November day. He says it was a conman and former U.S. Army paratrooper named Robert W. Rackstraw, who's now 74 and lives in the San Diego area. Rackstraw denies he's Cooper. He has told Colbert he plans to sue him for defamation, but so far no legal action has been taken. Rackstraw has not responded to phone calls and emails from the Oregonian. In 2016, Colbert produced a TV documentary and a book about the Cooper case, both of which point at Rackstraw. But only last November did he come upon what he considers the definitive evidence. That was when Colbert team member Rick Sherwood, a veteran of the Army's Signal Intelligence Corps, broke an encrypted code from a letter that was sent to newspapers just weeks after the hijacking. The letter, signed D.B. Cooper, offered details of the crime that hadn't been made public. The code on it, Sherwood concluded, revealed Rackstraw's military units. What are the odds that these digits would add up to this? Sherwood told the Oregonian last month. Astronomical. 1,000,000 to 1. Rackstraw didn't think anyone would be able to break it. Early in January, Colbert told the Oregonian that the FBI refused to reopen the Cooper case and pursue the evidence his team had discovered because it didn't want to admit that a group of volunteer sleuths had accomplished what the Bureau couldn't. "This is obviously about embarrassment and shame," he said. The FBI has had little to say about the case since closing it in 2016, insisting that it has received no useful fresh information. Cooper case expert Bruce Smith, author of D.B. Cooper and the FBI, says Colbert's years-long investigation has produced streams of invaluable information, but he worries that the documentary filmmaker's obsession with Rackstraw warps his judgment. Despite such criticism from fellow cooperatives, and the FBI's apparent disinterest in his efforts, Colbert has persisted, and he says he can now prove that the FBI is covering up the truth about the case. Over the past few weeks, he says, his team has decrypted codes on 4 more Cooper letters, all acquired from the government through the Freedom of Information Act, and tracked down corroborating evidence. One decrypted message points to the apparent reason for Rackstraw's continued freedom. He claimed he was working for the CIA at the time. Colbert said, "That stunner has been backed up now by court records, eyewitnesses to his mission departures and old spooks." Colbert is convinced Rackstraw had a Black Ops career that stretched from the Vietnam War to at least the 1980s Iran-Contra scandal, leading the intelligence community to protect him. Has Colbert really discovered both D.B. Cooper's real identity and a deep state conspiracy that's protecting the skyjacker? Today, he is in the nation's capital to publicly insist he has, but certainty about the case remains elusive, possibly even to the FBI. 4. What is Area 51? For decades, Americans were told that Area 51 didn't really exist and that the U.S. government had no official interest in aliens or UFOs. Statements to the contrary, official-sounding people cautioned, were probably the musings of crackpots in tinfoil hats. Well, score 1 for the crackpots. The Pentagon has officially confirmed that there was, in fact, a $22 million government program to collect and analyze anomalous aerospace threats. Government speak for UFOs. As the Washington Post's Joby Warwick reported, the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program was a rare instance of continued government investigations into a UFO phenomenon that was the subject of multiple official inquiries in the 1950s and 1960s. For a specific segment of the population that doesn't need to Google the terms Paradise Ranch and Cheshire Cat Airstrip, it was a eureka moment, the first of presumably many alien-related secrets that have slipped out of the clenched jaws of the government. The non-Googlers have it easy, it seems. The admission, and the fact that the government spent $22 million on UFO research, gives any out there theory a patina of credibility. But what about the rest of us who have not fully jumped onto the tinfoil hat bandwagon? What are we to make of 70 years of bizarre stories centered on a secret government base an hour's drive from the Las Vegas Strip? In 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower approved the addition of this strip of wasteland, known by its map designation as Area 51, to the Nevada test site, according to a CIA history of a spy plane declassified in 2013. The area was near the Atomic Energy Commission's vast, desolate proving grounds and was used to test the high-altitude U-2 reconnaissance plane. A parade of top-secret aircraft was tested in the area, according to Reuters, including the A-12 aircraft, a spy plane that flew faster than the speed of sound, and the angular F-117 stealth ground attack jet. But Area 51 quickly became a wireframe for not quite verifiable musings about alien life, secret technology and supernatural behavior. Gaping holes in out there theories had an easy explanation. The government is working diligently to keep the real story under wraps. The biggest working conspiracy theory is that Area 51 is where the U.S. government stored aliens and spacecraft that crash-landed on Earth, particularly the unidentifiable debris discovered by William Mac Brazel, a farmer, discovered metallic rods, pieces of plastic and silvery paper scraps in Roswell, NM. In 1947, he called the sheriff, who called the military, who carted the debris off in armored vehicles. But the secret was out, and it captured the imagination of the American public. The government, the theories go, experimented on the aliens and tried to harness the technology in their ship to manufacture interstellar spacecraft and produce powerful energy weapons. Lab-coated Area 51 scientists also were said to be mulling ways to manipulate, or weaponize the weather, travel through time and teleport. For decades, people reported seeing strange lights in the desert around Area 51, presumably alien aircraft taking off or being tested at the government facility. Adding fuel to the alien theories, Ray Santilli released a video in 1995 that purported to show an alien autopsy after the Roswell crash. The crowd that believed something wasn't quite right at Area 51 was buoyed by a lawsuit filed by workers at the facility. They reported rashes, respiratory ailments and even deaths related to their jobs. Of course, the alien aspects of those theories have crumbled under decades of scrutiny. Some have been explained away by declassified documents. Other theories have been outright fabrications. The debris Brazel found on his farm was part of a government cover-up. For example, it just didn't involve aliens. The Air Force claimed it was using high-altitude balloons to try to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The Air Force said as much. About 50 years after the debris was found, in a 231-page report, other officials have speculated that the debris came from a crashed nuclear bomber that had broken up over New Mexico. Roswell was, after all, the home of the 509th Composite Group, the atomic weapons unit that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. We do believe that something did happen at Roswell, one source close to the investigation told the Post's Jack Anderson and Michael Binstein in 1995. Something big. We don't know if it was a plane that crashed with a nuclear device on it, or if it was some other experimental situation, but everything we've seen so far points to an attempt on the part of the Air Force to lead anybody that looks at this down another track. Santilli's autopsy footage was easier to debunk. He admitted that it was a fake, though he maintains that it was based on actual footage. And the space around Area 51 was where the United States tested several of its more experimental aircraft as the Cold War raged, adding to its mystery. Incidents such as the crash on Braswell's farm or the sighting of several bright lights were shrouded in secrecy, and half-baked excuses that became fodder for people who believe the truth is out there. The experimental aircraft may have had something to do with the injuries suffered by the workers. As the Post's Richard Libby reported in 1997, they claimed materials, including anti-radar coating and other classified substances, had been burned in open pits on the base. Filmmakers took notice of the intrigue. Over the past 70 years, Area 51 has been cemented as a popular science fiction trope. Experiments on aliens and their spacecraft was an important plot point in the 1996 summer blockbuster Independence Day, in which a U.S. resistance force converges on Area 51 to launch a final battle. In the movie Super 8, the train crash that motors the plot involves material being transported from Area 51. But in the real world, government employees had been poring over their own film, captured by fighter pilots, of possible UFOs. Chris Mellon, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence who once worked for the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, said investigators had interviewed pilots who claimed they saw weird things in the air. Mellon, who now works with UFOdata, a private organization, described one video of an encounter with an unidentified object to Politico. It is white, oblong, some 40 feet long and perhaps 12 feet thick. The pilots are astonished to see the object suddenly reorient itself toward the approaching F/A-18. In a series of discrete tumbling maneuvers that seem to defy the laws of physics, the object takes a position directly behind the approaching F/A-18. The pilots capture gun camera footage and infrared imagery of the object. They are outmatched by a technology they've never seen. The Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program generated at least one report, a 490-page volume that describes alleged UFO sightings in the United States, and numerous other countries over multiple decades. 5. What is the Voynich manuscript? If you were compiling a list of the world's 100 oddest objects, just the weirdest stuff that human civilization has excreted over the millennia, then you'd have to leave room somewhere for the Voynich manuscript. It's 600 years old, written in a language no one can read, and full of diagrams no one understands. It is a genuine, bona fide, world-class mystery. This is presumably why when newsrooms around the world had a chance this week to publish stories claiming it had been decoded by artificial intelligence, they leapt at the opportunity. Except, of course, it hasn't. Not at all. According to experts, The Voynich manuscript remains as inscrutable as ever. But understanding why this new research fails to decode the text, and what exactly it does add to the annals of Voynichology, has its own value. It also emphasizes, if further emphasis were needed, that this manuscript is one extremely odd cookie. The research that sparked the coverage is a paper named Decoding Enigrammed Texts Written in an Unknown Language and Script. It was published in 2016, but it was presented at a conference last year and picked up by journalists earlier this month. In it, computer science professor Greg Kondrak and graduate student Bradley Howard describe a method for finding the source language of ciphered texts, before turning that method on the manuscript itself, and deciding that it was originally written in Hebrew, before being encoded in its current form. It's a claim that, if true, would be a glacier-sized break in an ice-cold case. The 240-page Voynich manuscript is written in an unknown alphabet that's never been seen before or since. The script is comprised of roughly 25 to 30 individual characters. Interpretations vary, written from left to right in a single, elegant hand. Scattered throughout are illustrations of unidentifiable plants, astrological diagrams, doodles of castles and dragons, and a particularly odd section that shows naked women bathing in pools connected by flowing tubes. It looks like the map of an ancient water park, but scholars suggest it might be medical or alchemical in intent. Most assume that the manuscript is written in what's called a substitution cipher. This is one of the simplest and most ancient types of codes, in which letters of an established alphabet are swapped for invented ones. The problem is that hundreds of years of study have been unable to work out which language the Voynich manuscript was originally written in. No one has ever made a convincing case for any particular language. Lisa Fagan Davis, the executive director of the Medieval Academy of America and a keen Voynich scholar, tells The Verge, "I've seen suggestions that it's encoding Arabic, Aztec, Roma, Latin, Italian." Davis says people tend to study the paleographic, forensic, and artistic evidence to find a country of origin, and with that, a source language, but she adds that computational analysis is also used. It's this tool that Kondrak and Howard picked up in their attempt to deconstruct the manuscript. They figured, like many cryptologists before them, that by computing certain qualities of the text, like, for example, how often each letter and each combination of letters appear, they could create a statistical fingerprint that could be compared to other languages. So, they trained a number of algorithms to pick out these metrics, using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as their sample text in a whopping 380 languages. Despite what some coverage suggested, this process did not involve neural networks or deep learning, just good old-fashioned statistical analysis, aka lots of counting and percentages, and it worked, not too badly anyway. According to Professor Shlomo Argaman, a computational linguist at Illinois Institute of Technology, the preliminary test results are perhaps slightly questionable, but not more so than many other results often published in the scientific literature. And so, with their algorithmic pattern matcher trained and tested, Kondrak and Howard turned to the Voynich manuscript. Here, say experts, is where things really started going downhill. The problem is not any single mistake, but a series of assumptions and omissions that give Kondrak and Howard more leeway in interpreting their results than is scientifically rigorous. The first is quite straightforward. Their algorithm was trained on modern written in 15th century Hebrew. The grammar, spelling, and vocabulary would have been quite different, especially for a manuscript like the Voynich that is scientific, as opposed to biblical or liturgical, in nature, says Davis. The second is that although Kondrak and Howard's algorithm can produce suggestions for source languages of ciphered texts, it doesn't evaluate the likelihood of these matches. So when the pair say that Hebrew was the highest scoring match for the manuscript without rating the likelihood, this is a bit of a meaningless boast. Someone has to have the highest score, says Argaman. They mention some of the other top matches. As I recall, one was Malay, which is a language very different from Hebrew. The third assumption is perhaps the biggest. Kondrak and Howard claim that as well as being a substitution cipher, the Voynich manuscript is also written in anagrams, so the letters in each individual word are scrambled. This is not a new suggestion in the world of Voynichology, but it's far from an established truth. It also perfectly sets up the final flourish of Kondrak and Hauer's research, translating the opening sentence of the Voynich manuscript into English. The sentence in question is this: "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people." Kondrak says, "It's a kind of strange sentence to start a manuscript, but it definitely makes sense." But even within the paper, he and Hauer describe how they had to fudge the translation to produce this result. "Their first attempt was not quite coherent," said a speaker of modern Hebrew, "and they had to make a couple of spelling corrections before feeding the characters into Google Translate to produce the result above." Anytime you have to resort to Google Translate over someone who has actually studied the language, you are going to lose some credibility, notes Fagan. But this is where the assumption that the manuscript was written in anagrams becomes even more crucial. Argument notes that written Hebrew is what's known as an abjad, meaning a script with no vowels. If you assume that the manuscript was written in Hebrew and that it's written in anagrams, then it becomes much easier to translate. Then, not only can you rearrange all the characters in a word to find something that makes sense, but you can add in your own vowels. This means lots and lots of just random sequences of letters form coherent words, says Arguman. Add this with the fact that Kondrak and Hauer made spelling corrections, and relied on Google Translate, a piece of software that looks so hard for meaningful content, it often turns gibberish into coherent sentences, and you can see why the experts are skeptical. The point here is that their method gives them huge latitude in doing this sort of impressionistic interpretation, says Arguman. They take this decoded sentence, squint at it through thick eyeglasses, and say that's good enough for us. Nick Belling, a Voynich expert who's written extensively on the subject, is more blunt. When asked by The Verge what chance he thinks the paper's conclusions are correct, he says, "So close to 0% as makes no practical difference." So, I decodes mysterious 600-year-old manuscript? Not so much. In fairness to Kondrak and Hauer, and as is often the case with these stories, the media certainly deserves a significant amount of blame for the exaggeration. The pair admits that their research is only a starting point, and experts we spoke to recognize the utility of their underlying algorithms. The experts just say too many steps were missed to start making any claims about the manuscript itself. And in many ways, it makes sense that attempts to crack the Voynich manuscript using artificial intelligence would be covered so breathlessly. A New Yorker article on the history of the manuscript describes it as the perfect canvas on which to project our worries about the difficult and the frightening and the arcane. And the same could be said about AI. In the contemporary media landscape, this diverse and complex group of technologies is often used as a stand-in for fears about automation, and unknowable, and uncontrollable machine intelligence. Pitting AI against the Voynich manuscript is like watching Godzilla fight Mothra. The spectacle is so fun that we don't care or think too hard about the details. Still, for experts, the fact that the manuscript remains impenetrable might be a relief. After all, if you've spent years and years of your life trying to decode a mysterious document, it would probably be a bit of a blow if some bloodless machine cracks it overnight. As Belling said in a final email, "Through my book, and my blog, I've probably written more actual historical research about the Voynich than anyone else alive. I've given talks on it, and made a TV documentary on it, and have been interviewed about it on radio and TV numerous times. And I still can't read it. The mystery lives on." 6. Do the Pollock sisters prove reincarnation? What happens to us when we die has always been a mystery that has caught the imagination since time unremembered, and there are just as many ideas on what the answer is as there are cultures that believe that this life is not the end. One very common idea is that we pass on not into some other dimension or higher realm, but that we are reborn into new bodies in a never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The concept we know as reincarnation. Is there any truth to this idea? Are we indeed recycled once again into new bodies and new lives upon our passing? There are various cases that seem to strongly suggest that reincarnation is indeed possible, and one of the more compelling is a famous case of two twin girls who have gone on to be one of the most compelling such accounts out there. The strange story begins in the quaint and quiet town of Hexham, in Northumberland, England, with the family of John and Florence Pollock and their two young daughters Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6. By all accounts they were a happy family and relatively well off considering their successful grocery and milk delivery business, and the two girls were said to be the best of friends and inseparable. Things couldn't have been better for their idyllic life. Yet on May 7, 1957, tragedy struck when, as the two Pollock children were on their way to church with a friend, they were hit by a car driven by a local woman who had taken an overdose of aspirin and phenobarbital in a bid to kill herself. The two Pollock children were killed instantly in the accident, reportedly sent flying through the air like cricket balls, and the other, a boy named Anthony, died later at the hospital. The devastating news was widely covered in England at the time, and the two parents of Joanna and Jacqueline were inconsolable over their loss. While Florence Pollock spun into a deep depression in the void conjured up by the loss, the highly religious John maintained hope that his daughters would somehow return to them, and he even reported having a vision of them coming back to be reborn to them in the form of twins. He told of this vision to his wife, who was trying to move on, not religious in the slightest, and did not for 1 second believe in reincarnation or heaven, and the two were practically divorced over the ensuing arguments over it. Despite this ordeal and all of the fighting, Florence would become pregnant the following year, and on October 4, 1958, gave birth to healthy twin girls, spookily just as John had predicted. It was all especially odd since their doctor had told them it was to be only a single birth based on the heartbeat signature of the fetus, and neither one of the parents had had any history of twins in their families. The twins, Jillian and Jennifer, were considered by John to be a sort of miracle, and he truly believed that his dead daughters had come back to them as he had said, citing as evidence an odd birthmark on Jennifer's right eye that eerily resembled a scar that Jacqueline had had in the same exact spot, as well as a matching round birthmark on her waist. Although they were identical twins, Jillian lacked any such marks, making it quite unusual. The family moved from Hexham to a town called Whitley Bay when the twins were just a few months old. And it was here where things would start to get strange. As soon as they were old enough to talk, the twins began asking for and describing specific toys that Joanna and Jacqueline had owned, even calling their dolls by name, which was rather bizarre as the parents had boxed those toys up to store away in the attic and the twins had never seen them before, and indeed were not even aware that they had had two sisters who had died. When the toys were brought down from the attic, each of the twins instinctively collected the correct respective ones that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline without hesitating and without any mistake, all the while proclaiming that they were Santa's gifts, which was also correct. Other strangeness was that the two twins liked the same foods that Joanna and Jacqueline had the same respective personalities, mannerisms, and behaviors, liked the same games, and Jillian once pointed at the birthmark on Jennifer's forehead and accurately said that it was where Jacqueline had hit her head on a bucket when she was younger, leaving a scar. There was also the weird fact that the twins even had the same gait as their dead sisters when they walked and even the same general builds, with Jillian being somewhat more slender as Joanna had been, and Jennifer a bit more stocky, as had been the case with Jacqueline. In addition, Jacqueline had been having trouble learning to write at the time of her death because she had tended to hold her pencil upright in her fist, which was the exact same habit that Jennifer developed when she too began to learn how to write, and she would not shake the habit until she was 7. Such oddities continued on over the years, with the girls eerily giving details of things that only their parents and Joanna and Jacqueline could have known, and rather spookily they were said to be terrified of passing cars, to the point that it was difficult to cajole them into crossing the street. The mother, Florence, once overheard the two girls discussing the actual accident that had killed Joanna and Jacqueline with details they could not have known. One thing they would supposedly often do was that Jennifer would rest her head on Jillian's lap, and Jennifer would say there was blood coming from her eyes. When the family took a trip back to Hexham, the twins knew their way around and could accurately point out landmarks by name and the school they remembered attending, Joanna and Jacqueline's school, even though they would have been too young to have remembered any of these details when they had last been there, and no one had ever told them about these things. These stories were unusual enough to make it into local newspapers, which caught the attention of psychologist Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was highly interested in evidence of reincarnation in children. He began to make frequent visits to the Pollocks, interviewing them and examining the birthmarks, and he would discover some interesting details. For instance, the twins were identical, meaning that they came from a single egg, yet they had slightly different builds that matched their dead sisters who had not been twins, and the fact that Jennifer had an unusual and ended birthmark matching a past life injury of Jacqueline, whereas Jillian did not, was difficult to explain genetically. Interestingly, these apparent memories of the twins' past lives began to fade at around the age of 5, after which they led relatively normal lives without being haunted by the past. Yet Stevenson would keep contact with the family for years, all the way up to Florence's death in 1979, and John's death in 1985. Although the twins grew up generally not remembering any more of their supposed past lives, in 1981, Jillian had a series of lucid visions in which she remembered playing in a sandbox in the town of Wickham as Joanna had done when she was around 3, and was able to perfectly describe the area even though Jillian had never been to Wickham. These powerful visions passed, but showed that the memories were still lurking there somewhere deep in her psyche. Indeed, Stevenson was so enthralled with the Pollock case that he would write a case report on it in a volume of Reincarnation and Biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects, as well as mention it in 1987, in a book called Children Who Remember Previous Lives, A Question of Reincarnation. He would go on to write a total of 12 books on the subject of reincarnation and study thousands of such cases in children. The case of the Pollock twins has been held up by many as one of the most convincing cases for proof of reincarnation there is, but it has been met with its share of skepticism as well. One theory is that John Pollock, who was an avid believer in reincarnation, and had been convinced that his dead daughters would come back to him even before the twins were born, must have mentioned things related to Johanna and Jacqueline to his new daughters, which they would have picked up on, if even subconsciously. Relatives and family friends could have also talked about the girls and their deaths in the presence of the twins. However, John and Florence, who herself did not believe in reincarnation, and was baffled by the twins, were adamant right up until their deaths that they had never mentioned anything about Joanna and Jacqueline to the twins until they were much older. It is important to note that Stevenson himself considered the possibility that the twins could have been influenced by what their parents said, but he eventually came to the conclusion that it would have been impossible for them to so exactly mold the behaviors and recollections of their twins to match so closely to their dead sisters through this alone. It was also noted that Florence Pollock did not believe in reincarnation at all, yet she witnessed the same puzzling phenomena as everyone else, meaning that in her case this wasn't just all testimony colored by John's belief in reincarnation. Stevenson also pointed out that the birthmarks provided physical evidence that something strange was going on, and indeed birthmarks matching injuries, scars or other birthmarks of past lives are a fairly common, recurring phenomenon with reincarnation cases. In the end, despite the criticism, Stevenson strongly believed that the evidence, when coupled with hundreds of other similar cases, were beyond rational explanation and undoubtedly pointed to reincarnation being real, and he believed the Pollock case to be genuine. It is unknown just what is going on with the case of the Pollock twins, or just what it means for the case for reincarnation. It is very intriguing, but we are still left to wonder what it all means. Were these two girls the re-embodiment of Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock? Does this constitute some strong evidence that we are indeed in a cycle of death and rebirth? No one really knows, but it remains one of the more interesting cases of supposed reincarnation there is. Interesting case 7. Where are the Sodder children? Fayette County's most persistent mystery has long been a thread in the fabric of local lore, rumors and stories. A billboard seeking information about George and Jenny Sodder, 5 missing children, stood along W.16 for nearly 4 decades, and generations of children stared at their portraits and wondered. That story is now a national mystery, published again in the February 2016 edition of Reader's Digest under the title The Children Who Vanished. The case of the Sodder children has become an enduring drama that transcends its time period, said Reader's Digest editor Barbara O'Dare. The story, originally published in the Smithsonian, is especially intriguing because it remains a head-scratcher, perfect for the amateur sleuths among us. On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sodders' home, just 4 miles outside Fayetteville, caught fire and burned to the ground. The parents rescued 4 of their 10 children. Their second oldest was serving in the military, but the 5 other children seemed to vanish in a cloud of smoke. As reported in the original Smithsonian Magazine story in December 2012, George Sodder tried to reach the second-story window where he believed his children were trapped. His ladder, always kept leaning against the house, was gone. He tried to move his truck and use it to reach the second-story window, but his truck refused to start. When the fire department arrived hours after the fire, there was nothing left of the house, but there was also no sign of the 5 children believed to be trapped inside. No remains and no bones. As the family continued to seek answers, the mysteries surrounding their children's disappearance grew. Rumors at the time indicated the fire chief found a heart at the scene of the fire and buried it. Later a box with a heart was recovered at the scene, but the local funeral home owner said he believed it was a fresh cow's liver and showed no signs of being in a fire. More rumors developed as witnesses claimed to have seen the children taken away from the fire in a car or served later Christmas Day at a diner near Charleston. In 1968, the Sodders received a photo in the mail from Kentucky, allegedly of their son Louis as an adult. They sent a private investigator to Kentucky and never heard from him again. Although the billboard had come down by the early 1990s, Fayette County residents who grew up in the decades following the children's disappearance have never forgotten the many questions surrounding their disappearance. Lita Eskew was in high school at the time of the fire and, like the Sodders, was a member of a strong and flourishing Italian community in and around Fayetteville. She recalled people driving by the site long after the house burned, looking for any signs of the children. "We were really upset. We could not understand how they did not find any remains at all. They roped off the home, but we just went down and looked. Everybody drove by because it was such a tragedy," she said. Rumors swirled. She remembered, maybe the children were taken and sold. Maybe Italian relatives took them back to Italy. Maybe the fire was started to cover up a kidnapping. "I still think about those children and wonder," she added. Her daughter, Commissioner Denise Scalf, said the W.16 billboard was always an ominous marker of the mystery and the past. Each time they drove to Charleston, you could feel something in the pit of your stomach and wonder, are they still living? Where are they? She explained. For years and years the community expected them to show up somewhere. The entire thing was truly a mystery. You have to wonder if today's world of forensics would have been able to unearth more. Growing up, Scalf remembers rumors continued long after the 1945 fire. One of the most persistent rumors remains, if they had been kidnapped, why did they never contact their family when they got older? 8. What really happened to young Walter Collins? The disappearance of 9-year-old Walter Collins in 1928, in Los Angeles set in motion one of the most incredible series of events of the decade. The disappearance not only included child endangerment, but also brought to light female disempowerment, corruption, and flagrant mistreatment of those involved in the case. On March 10, 1928, Christine Collins discovered every parent's worst fear. Her son Walter was nowhere to be found. While the police suspected that Walter had simply run away, Christine feared the worst. She refused to believe that her young boy would run off, so she came to the dreaded conclusion that he had been kidnapped. Now with the suspicion that Walter had been taken, the police began to scan the Collins Street and the neighborhood of Lincoln Heights in Los Angeles. Local thugs were targeted, questioned, and interrogated on the whereabouts of Walter, but the search turned up nothing. It was not until witnesses were sought out that a neighbor, Mrs. A. Baker, claimed that she saw Walter in an automobile, begging to be released, in the company of 2 foreign-looking people. Other neighbors gave information as well. They said that days prior to Walter's abduction, an Italian-looking man, along with a woman, were asking for Walter's address. All information and all leads led to nothing. There was simply no trace of Walter that led the police to finding him or finding out who had taken him. After searching the Lincoln Park Lake for Walter's body, and after a massive search of the northeastern part of the city, neither Walter nor any trace of him was found. Walter had now been missing without a trace for over a month. Christine Collins was devastated, but she remained hopeful that each day she would hear news of her young son. Months passed, and she had to work daily with the racing thoughts of Walter's fate constantly in her head. Losing sleep and having little motivation to continue her normal life, she did not surrender to the thought that Walter was gone forever. 5 months after Walter's disappearance, a miracle happened. Walter had been found. It was now August, and Christine received the confirming news that Walter was alive in DeKalb, Illinois. It is hard to imagine how much joy, love, and excitement Christine experienced when she heard this news. Her persistent hoping seemed to have worked. Walter was immediately put on a train to Los Angeles to be returned to Christine. The reuniting of mother and son was to be celebrated as a massive success of the police force. But as the approaching train came to a stop, with the anticipation of a happy reunion after 5 agonizing months, Christine immediately exclaimed that the boy who descended from the train was not her son. What Christine thought was the answer to her prayers, the miracle of a lifetime, proved not to be the case. The boy standing in front of her was not her son. Captain J.J. Jones of the LAPD could not believe what Christine was insisting. Jones explained to Christine that Walter simply seemed to change because of the duration of the months and the traumatic experiences that he had encountered. Christine rejected Jones' explanation. Christine insisted that she would know her own son, no matter the circumstances. Captain Jones would not take Christine's word for it, and would under no circumstances let it be known that the Los Angeles Police Department had made a mistake. Trying to avoid humiliation, Jones told Christine to take Walter home and try him out for a while, to see if her memory would clear, to see that this was indeed her boy. Christine, feeling the pressure from both the public and the police about the reunion, agreed to take the boy home. Subsequently, the police began to question Walter in hopes of finding his abductor. He was questioned on how he had escaped the kidnapper, and the police wanted to know how he had ended up in Illinois. Police and doctors were unable to get straight answers from the boy. He said little to nothing. It was as if he was keeping a secret, and no one could get the boy to say anything that he knew. Christine knew that the boy was not Walter, but she agreed to house and care for him. But she still sought to prove that she was right. She did not want the police to stop looking for the true Walter because she knew that he was still out there. Christine used Walter's dental records to prove the difference in Walter and the boy who now lived with her. Those records did indeed demonstrate marked differences in the two boys' teeth. Christine then took the dental records to Captain J.J. Jones, but the dental records proved to be no help. Not only did Jones not believe Christine even with the records, he concluded that Christine was only trying to humiliate the Los Angeles Police Department. Captain Jones would not stand for this slander, especially by a woman, so Jones took immediate action. Jones had Christine Collins committed to the psychopathic ward of the General Hospital to be placed under observation under Code 12 internment, which was intended to jail anyone who was proving to be difficult. Christine Collins remained in the hospital under harsh circumstances. She was treated inhumanely and fell victim to different forms of medicine to try and bring her to her senses, and for her to admit to this boy being the true Walter. 10 days passed, and then good news came that released Christine. The believed Walter had confessed to not being the real Walter. The boy was really Arthur Hutchins, Jr. His true name was discovered even after he provided another fake name of Billy Fields. When questioned as to why Arthur would pose as Walter, Arthur admitted that when he saw a picture of Walter and saw their resemblance, he saw an opportunity. He knew that if he pretended to be Walter, he would have a one-way ticket to Los Angeles and an increased chance of making it in the movies, and even meet some of his favorite stars. The disappearance of Walter Collins would now resume, and would now resume from the very beginning. With no leads, Christine returned to her job, and was back to where she had been for nearly half of a year. Her daily routine remained. She would work, go home, and hope to hear about Walter. Meanwhile, in Wineville, California, unthinkable events were occurring. It all began to unravel when Jessie Clark was eager to check up on her younger brother, Sanford Clark, who had moved to California 2 years prior with their uncle Gordon Stewart Northcott and his mother Sarah Louise. Jessie had become increasingly concerned for Sanford's safety, and his situation with their uncle Gordon. She decided to travel down to find out what exactly was taking place. Jessie's fears of abuse and torment coming to Sanford from Gordon became clear during her visit, and not only was terror being brought upon Sanford, but Gordon even became violent towards Jessie herself. Jessie quickly took action. She returned home to Canada and told everything to her mother, who had no hesitation in informing the police of the abuse. When U.S. authorities got the information of Gordon Northcott's actions, they made an immediate visit to his residence in Wineville, to a ranch out in the middle of nowhere. When Northcott saw the authorities driving up, he demanded that Sanford stall them for as long as he possibly could. Sanford did as he was told due to his own fear of Gordon. Gordon and his mother Sarah Louise fled, and were not captured until they were found in British Columbia. Their capture was crucial thanks to what Sanford had told the police about Gordon and Sarah Louise. Sanford Clark informed the police that Gordon Stewart Northcott and Sarah Louise had murdered the missing boy, Walter Collins. Sanford also admitted that Walter was not the only boy who fell victim to the Northcott's hand, but other boys remained at the farm as well. Sanford Clark told everything to the police about what took place. He said that the boys were killed by an axe, and that quicklime was poured over their bodies before disposing them. In shock and disbelief, the police, with Sanford by their side, returned to Wineville to dig up the remains that Sanford claimed were there. Physical remains were found on the farm proving that boys had been there, including the Winslow brothers who had gone missing only 30 miles away from where Walter had been taken. Library books belonging to the boys and clothes had been found in the chicken coop, where the Northcotts kept the boys locked in. A note written by the Winslow brothers was even discovered, simply saying, "Don't worry, we are fine." When Sanford took the authorities to the graves, the bodies no longer remained, only pieces of bodies were found. Gordon Northcott and his mother had emptied them and burned the bodies and remains in the desert before Jesse Clark informed the authorities about the negative conditions Sanford faced. Some human bones and a blood-soaked mattress did turn up, and it proved that Nelson and Louis Winslow, Walter, and a ranch hand, Alvin Gaudia, had all been tragically murdered. It was December 3rd, when Gordon Stewart Northcott confessed to the murders of the Winslow brothers and Alvin Gaudia. Sarah Louise Northcott confessed to the murder of Walter Collins. Gordon Northcott hinted that there were more than 4 boys that fell victim to his murderous activities. It is believed that the Northcotts may have been guilty of killing at least 20. Gordon Stewart Northcott was found guilty of having committed 3 murders, and was sentenced to hang. His mother, Sarah Louise, was also found guilty of the murder of Walter Collins and sentenced to life in prison. This did not please Christine Collins. Walter's entire body had not been found, so she still held out hope that her son might still be alive. She decided to go meet the man who was said to have taken Walter. Gordon Stewart Northcott. Collins met with Northcott to discuss whether or not he and his mother had truly killed her son. Although Northcott had previously admitted to the killings being done by them, he told Christine that they did not kill Walter. Christine believed Northcott. She chose to believe that this man did not take part in killing her son so that she could hold out hope that he may one day return. These slayings have become known as the Wineville Chicken Coop Case murders, and Gordon Stewart Northcott was hanged on October 2, 1930, at San Quentin, California. Christine Collins was granted $10,800 against Captain J.J. Jones for his sending her to a psychiatric ward, and for his denial at believing her claims that the boy returned to her was not Walter. But Jones never paid her, and was only given a 4-month suspension for what he had done against her. 13 Christine never gave up hope that Walter remained alive, but he remained unfound for the remainder of her life.